May 7, 1945, Reims, France. Germany signed the surrender, but in a wet pine forest near the Austrian border, one SS officer was still feeding names into a fire. Not bodies, not weapons, names. Stacks of personnel files, transport orders, guard rosters, field reports with initials in the margins and numbers in the columns. Standartenführer Matthias Keller held each folder over the rim of a rusted oil drum and watched 12 years of evidence turn black. He did not look like a man trying to escape. He looked like a man trying to erase the world before the world could read it. When the American patrol came through the trees, Keller did not run. He closed the lid on the satchel beside him, straightened his coat, and raised both hands with the lazy irritation of a man interrupted at work. An American sergeant shouted for his name. Keller looked past him at the officer in the patrol, and in clean formal English he said one word, "Colonel." That was not just his rank. That was his last hiding place. 3 days later, in handcuffs, inside a requisitioned Third Army building in Bavaria, Keller would make a demand so arrogant that the room went silent before anyone could answer. He would demand that an American officer salute him, and George S. Patton would give him exactly what he asked for, not because Keller deserved it, because Patton understood that some men cannot be broken by being refused. They have to be shown the thing they are pretending to be. To understand why that moment mattered, you have to understand what Keller believed the uniform had done for him. The SS did not merely give men titles. It gave them a mythology. It told them they were selected, screened, purified, raised above the ordinary rules that restrained ordinary men. For 12 years, Keller had lived inside that lie. He had served in occupied Poland. He had served behind the Eastern Front. He had signed reports from security actions that used clean bureaucratic language for things no clean language could hold. Villages cleared, prisoners processed, transport completed. The paper never screamed. That was the point of the paper. It made murder look like administration. And every promotion told Keller the same thing. You are not a criminal. You are an officer. By the spring of 1945, the armies around him knew better. The camps had been opened. The roads in Germany were full of civilians, prisoners, displaced families, soldiers throwing away uniforms, and men with new names sewn into old jackets. But Keller's mind had not surrendered just because Germany had. That is one of the hardest truths about defeated systems. The flags come down quickly. The myth inside the men takes longer. When the patrol searched Keller's satchel, they found forged civilian papers identifying him as a widowed schoolmaster from Augsburg. They found a shaving kit, a folded wool scarf, 2 watches that did not match his supposed story, and under the false bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, they found the one thing he could not quite abandon: his SS tunic, pressed, brushed, medals wrapped separately, collar tabs protected like relics. The uniform had no country left, no command left, no future left. But Keller had kept it anyway, because without it, he was just a man with burned paper under his fingernails. The MPs brought him into the Third Army Zone 2 days later. The building had been a local administrative office before the Americans took it over. Maps covered the walls. Field phones sat on desks. Coffee tasted like metal. Clerks moved in and out with the exhausted speed of men who had won a war and inherited a continent. George Patton was not in a mood for costume. At 60 years old, Patton had spent most of his life thinking about war as if it were both a profession and a curse. He respected courage. He respected discipline. He respected soldiers who did their duty under fire. But he had a special contempt for men who borrowed the language of honor to cover the absence of it. To Patton, a salute was not decoration. It was not vanity. It was a visible link in a chain. Duty, command, sacrifice, responsibility. Used honestly, it meant something. Used by a man like Keller, it was theft. Keller entered in handcuffs between 2 MPs. He had asked to wear the tunic. The request had been denied, so he arrived in a gray shirt, black trousers, and polished boots, with his posture doing the work his uniform could not. He scanned the room, the maps, the flags, the officers, the young lieutenant standing near the door. Then he turned toward Patton and announced, in English, that he was Standartenführer Matthias Keller of the Waffen-SS. His rank, he said, was equivalent to colonel. Military courtesy, he said, required junior officers to salute senior officers. Then he pointed his chin toward the lieutenant. He will salute me now. The room did not merely become quiet. It changed temperature. The lieutenant looked at Keller, then at Patton, then back at Keller as if checking whether a prisoner in handcuffs had truly just issued an order inside an American headquarters. Patton put down the paper he had been reading. Slowly, he looked at Keller with the stillness of a man studying a dangerous animal that thinks it is still behind glass. Say it did, same words, same certainty, same dead little tone, rank, protocol, salute. Patton stood. He walked around the desk without hurrying. No shouting, no theatrics. That made it worse. Anger would have let Keller imagine he was still in a contest between officers. Patton did not give him that mercy. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough that Keller had to look at him. Then Patton said quietly, "You are asking for the ceremony of a profession you disgraced." Keller's jaw tightened. He had his defense ready. They always did. He had obeyed orders. He had served his state. He had fought Bolshevism. He had been a soldier. Patton listened, not with patience, with containment. When Keller finished, Patton asked him a simple question. "How many unarmed people did your paperwork move?" Keller said nothing. Patton looked down at Keller's hands. The fingers were still stained dark from burned ink and soot. "That is what you were burning when we found you," Patton said. "Not military secrets, memory." Keller answered with the old line, "I followed orders." Patton's face did not move. "Then you followed orders into a pit," he said. "And now you want my army to salute you for climbing out in a clean shirt." For the first time, Keller blinked. The lieutenant near the door shifted his weight. The MPs held still. Everyone in the room understood that something was about to happen. They simply did not know what shape it would take. Patton turned toward the lieutenant. "Lieutenant." The young man straightened. "Yes, sir. Salute the prisoner." No one moved. The order seemed to hang in the air like a mistake. Patton did not repeat himself loudly. He did not need to. "Salute him." The lieutenant raised his hand. Perfectly. Textbook. Palm angled, elbow sharp, eyes forward. For 1 second, Keller's face changed. The color came back. The shoulders lifted. The old machinery inside him turned once more. He had demanded recognition, and the Americans had given it. Even here, even now, even in handcuffs, the rank still meant something. The uniform still meant something. The SS still meant something. Patton let him have that second. That was the cruelty of it. Not physical cruelty, moral precision. He let the illusion stand just long enough for Keller to step inside it. Then he turned back to the lieutenant. "Tell him what that salute means." The lieutenant swallowed. He understood now. "It is a mark of respect between soldiers, sir." Patton did not look away from Keller. "Go on. Between men who serve with honor. Men under lawful command. Men who accept responsibility for what they do." Patton nodded once. Then he said to Keller, "You thought that was for you." Keller's expression hardened. Patton stepped closer. "It was not. That salute belongs to him. It belongs to men who can still stand inside the meaning of it. You were allowed to see it once so you would understand the distance between the thing you are demanding and the thing you became." The room stayed silent. Outside, a truck engine coughed in the street. Inside, Keller seemed to shrink without moving. Then Patton gave the order that finished it. "Remove every military item from him." Keller snapped his head up. Patton continued, "Boots, medals, any insignia, any document that claims rank." Keller said, "You cannot do that." Patton said, "I can start with the boots." The MPs moved. Keller resisted, but not like a brave man, like a man trying to keep a costume from being pulled off in public. A shoulder twist, a step back, a useless demand in German, a second demand in English. He said he had rights as an officer. Patton answered without raising his voice, "You will get rights as a prisoner." The belt came off. Then the boots, then the small case of medals was opened and placed on the desk, not as honors, but as evidence. The tunic he had hidden in the satchel was brought in and laid across a chair. Patton looked at it once. Black cloth, silver thread, symbols polished long after the world behind them had rotted. "That," he said, "is not a uniform anymore. It is a receipt." Keller was left in socks, trousers, and a plain shirt. Without the boots, he looked shorter. Without the belt, older. Without the medals, ordinary. And that was the part he could not bear. The Americans had not beaten him. They had not needed to. They had simply removed the borrowed shape, and the man underneath had no structure of his own. Patton returned to his desk. Keller found one last sentence. "You can take the clothing," he said. "You cannot take what I am." Patton did not sit down yet. He turned. "No," he said, "I cannot." Then he pointed to the scorched papers recovered from Keller's satchel. "But they can." The MPs led Keller out. This time he did not walk like a man arriving for a meeting. He walked like a man hearing his own footsteps for the first time, and on the desk behind him, beside the medals, lay the thing he had failed to burn. Not a full archive, not enough to tell the whole story. Just several warped sheets of paper, half blackened at the edges, a transport code, 3 initials, a depot stamp, a list of names copied so neatly that whoever wrote them had probably believed neatness could make the act neutral. That was the part Keller never understood. Fire destroys paper. It does not always destroy the pattern. Within weeks, the war became something different. The fighting stopped. The work changed. Armies that had spent years moving forward now had to look backward. At camps, at graves, at warehouses full of records, at men who had thrown away uniforms and stepped into civilian lines with forged ration cards and invented childhoods. The public wanted victory. The investigators got boxes, crates of them, ledgers from offices that had not been completely burned, train records, motor pool logs, prisoner transfer cards, hotel registers, telegrams, payroll sheets, lists of guards assigned to places they would later claim they had never been. The Nazi state had murdered with rifles, gas, hunger, and labor, but it had also murdered with forms, and because it had used forms, it had left edges. That was where Major Thomas Avery came in. Avery had been a prosecutor before the war. He was not famous. He did not carry pearl-handled revolvers. He did not make speeches that reporters wrote down. He had a narrow face, tired eyes, and the gift of distrusting a blank space on a document. Before the war, he had built cases against men who changed names for a living: smugglers, fraud accountants, organized crime couriers. He knew that a false identity is never built from nothing. It steals pieces, a birthday that almost matches, a birthplace far enough away to be hard to check, a dead man's papers, a profession that explains travel, a signature practiced until it stops looking practiced. But there is always a seam, always. Avery saw Keller's burned sheets in June 1945, not because Keller was important by himself. Keller was just one prisoner, one arrogant man in one room. What mattered was the paper he had tried to erase. The depot stamp connected to a transportation office outside Munich. The code matched a route used by a security unit in 1943. The initials appeared in a separate requisition list recovered from a regional archive in Würzburg. 3 fragments, 3 offices, 1 pattern. Avery told his superior officer that the fugitives would not be found by chasing faces. Faces could grow beards, names could change, uniforms could be buried. But offices had habits. Find the habits, Avery said, and the men will start appearing. His superior told him there were already too many prisoners to process, too many camps to document, too much chaos to organize. Avery said chaos was exactly why the guilty were moving. The answer was still no. So Avery did what stubborn investigators have always done. He found someone more stubborn. Her name was Dr. Miriam Stein. She was a German-born Jewish historian who had left Europe before the war and spent years studying the administrative structure of the SS from the outside, the way a doctor studies the anatomy of a disease. She knew which offices kept duplicates, which clerks filed personnel transfers, which abbreviations meant field command, and which meant camp administration. She knew that the SS loved hierarchy so much that even its crimes had filing paths. When Avery showed her Keller's burned sheets, she did not touch them at first. She only leaned over the table and read the surviving marks. Then she said, "This is not a scrap. This is an address." Avery looked at her. "To what?" Stein tapped the depot stamp. "To the office that kept the copy. That was the beginning of the paper net. Not a heroic name. Not an official monument. A net." Avery and Stein began with the assumption that every escaped officer had left 2 lives behind, and the life the bureaucracy kept without asking his permission. They built cards by hand, real names, likely aliases, units, transfer dates, rail routes, medical records, known handwriting samples, witness descriptions, scars, languages spoken, bank names, ports, clerks who remembered too much and feared saying it aloud. They were not hunting one man. They were hunting the gap between a man's new story and his old paperwork. Their first major thread came from a motor pool ledger in Bavaria. A former SS officer named Otto Brandt had vanished in April 1945. Survivors had placed him with a security detachment in Ukraine. A prisoner had remembered the scar on his left cheek. A clerk had remembered that he smoked cheap French cigarettes even when German tobacco was available. Small details, human details. The sort of things fugitives forget witnesses keep. The motor pool ledger showed that on April 24th, Brandt had signed out a staff car under his real name. Destination South. Reason communications transfer. The car was found abandoned near the Swiss border. That could have been the end of it. But Stein found a hotel card from Basel bearing a false name with the left cheek scar noted by a suspicious clerk. Avery found a shipping record out of Genoa. A man listed as a Belgian machinery agent. Age wrong by 2 years. Height right. Languages right. Signature too careful. Destination Buenos Aires. Brandt had not disappeared. He had become a clerical disagreement, and clerical disagreements can be chased. By late 1946, the chase had changed. The men Avery and Stein were looking for were no longer confused refugees improvising at borders. They were organizing. Escape routes had hardened into networks, safe houses, priests and relief workers who asked too few questions, diplomatic sympathizers, former officers moving money through banks that preferred not to look closely at where the money came from. The routes became known by a name that sounded almost too small for what they carried. Rat lines. Men who had supervised murder crossed oceans under names that belonged to farmers, engineers, widowers, traveling salesmen. They stepped off ships in South America and learned to become quiet. They opened shops. They joined clubs. They taught children. They sat at dinner tables and asked neighbors not to talk about Europe. And beneath those new lives, Avery's cards kept growing. Then the hunters were hunted back. In November 1946, 3 field investigators in South America were exposed. Their cover names appeared in a German-language newspaper read by the exile community. Not just their cover names, their real names, their hometowns. Enough family information to make the message unmistakable. Stop. 2 men asked to be reassigned. The 3rd stayed and never slept properly again. 4 active cases went cold within 6 weeks. Brandt vanished a 2nd time. No hotel card, no bank transfer, no helpful signature. Nothing. For the first time, Avery understood the enemy had read the shape of his method. These were not panicked men anymore. They were former intelligence officers, police commanders, administrators of occupation. They knew surveillance. They knew pressure. They knew how to make witnesses afraid. And they knew how to make a government wonder if justice was worth a diplomatic incident. Avery was told to slow down, to wait for better channels, to avoid cases that crossed borders too aggressively. He was also handed a memo after one tribunal went badly. A case had relied on records gathered before the authorization paperwork was complete. The documents were real. The man was guilty, but the chain was flawed. The sentence was lighter than it should have been. The memo said, in careful language, that Avery's urgency had damaged justice. He read it once, then again, then a third time. There was no defense that made him feel clean. If he had moved slowly, men would have escaped. Because he had moved quickly, one case had cracked. That is the kind of choice history rarely leaves in speeches. It leaves it on a desk at midnight, with a lamp humming, with a name on a file, with the knowledge that either way someone will say you were wrong. Stein found him there after midnight. She did not offer comfort. She was not a comforting woman. She placed a thin folder on his desk. Avery looked up. What kind? The tired kind. Brandt had used a bank contact in Buenos Aires that connected through two intermediaries to the Basel alias. Not enough for an arrest by itself, but enough to ask the right government the right question. The answer came back 3 weeks later. Brandt was not in Buenos Aires. He was in Chile, Santiago. Living as a Belgian agricultural consultant named Henri. Arrest happened before dawn. March 947. A narrow apartment in Providencia. Chilean police at the door. An American observer in the hallway. Brandt opened the door in a robe and slippers, and for 1 second the whole lie looked insultingly ordinary. A table with breakfast dishes, a newspaper folded beside coffee, a clean apartment, a quiet street, no uniform, no pistol, no map with red pins. Just a man who had learned that evil survives best when it looks boring. The police found the case under loose floorboards. Inside were his original identity papers, a packet of photographs, foreign currency, and a list of 43 names with addresses in 6 countries. Some were useless, some were old, some led nowhere. 17 led somewhere. Brandt did not protest when the handcuffs closed. He looked at the officer, then at the American observer, then at the floor. The man who had crossed borders, changed names, joined a network, and outweighted half the world finally understood the thing Keller had been shown in Patton's office. The uniform was not the identity, the paperwork was. At Brandt's tribunal, Avery sat in the gallery. The prosecution did not need anger. It had sequence, real name, unit assignment, security detachment, vehicle ledger, border crossing, hotel card, shipping manifest, bank contact, alias, apartment, floorboard case, name list. The defense said he had followed orders. The room had heard that phrase so many times it no longer sounded like language. It sounded like a door trying to close. But the paper kept it open. Brandt was convicted. The sentence did not bring back a single person. That was not what sentences do. It did something smaller, and because it was smaller, it was possible. It made his calculation wrong. He had calculated that chaos would protect him. He had calculated that a new name could cover an old life. He had calculated that the dead would have no clerks. He was wrong. The work continued for years. Boxes became indexes. Indexes became trials. Some men were found. Some died before they could be tried. Some slipped beyond reach and stayed there. That is the part stories like this are tempted to hide. They want a clean ending, a full net, every name answered, every file closed. History does not give that. The real work of accountability is more honest and more painful. It is done inside limits by tired people with imperfect authority against men who have every reason to lie and every skill needed to do it well. When the International Military Tribunal opened in Nuremberg in November 1945, The world began building a legal language for crimes that had already exceeded ordinary language. Years later, in Germany, institutions would continue the work of investigating Nazi crimes through archives, witness statements, and surviving records. The names changed, the offices changed, the method endured. Do not believe the costume, follow the trace. Miriam Stein returned to teaching after the work consumed more of her life than she ever admitted aloud. She wrote about administrative systems with a dryness that some readers mistook for coldness. It was not coldness, it was control. She knew what happened when emotion outran evidence. She had seen men survive on confusion, so she made confusion smaller. One abbreviation at a time, one signature at a time, one recovered duplicate at a time. Avery went home older than his age. He kept one photograph in his office, not Patton, not the tribunal, not Brandt in handcuffs, a filing cabinet in a basement. The drawer was open. Inside were motor pool sheets curled at the edges from damp. When his daughter once asked him why he kept a photograph of a cabinet, Avery told her, "Because people run paperweights." And that is where the story really ends. Not with a salute, not with a stripped uniform, not with a single conviction. With the thing Keller never understood when he fed those folders into the fire. He thought the paper was the danger, because paper remembered. He was right about that. He was wrong about everything else. He thought memory could be burned if you worked fast enough. He thought rank could survive after honor had died. He thought a salute could make a criminal look like a soldier. Patton saw the lie in the room and stripped it down to the man. Avery and saw the man had changed names and followed it across borders. One moment exposed the costume, the other exposed the trail. The uniform meant nothing, the rank meant nothing, the new name meant nothing. What mattered was what had been done, and what had been done left marks. The truth stayed.